At nearly 19,000 feet, a person can disappear in a single second. And sometimes, it happens where you least expect it. Not because of a mistake, not because of recklessness, not even on the way up. On July 28, 2025, Laura Dahlmeier was already descending from Laila Peak in the Karakoram. She was less than 200 vertical feet from the summit, but the decision had already been made. Rockfall was increasing. The ice was losing its hardness. The temperature was too high for a face like this. By every standard in mountaineering, it was the right moment to turn back. In climbing, the descent is considered the most vulnerable part of any route. The way down looked calm. The rope team moved section by section, fully focused. And that's exactly why what happened next came as a shock. A single rock broke loose from the wall. Not a slide, not a cascade, one large piece, accelerating almost instantly. A dull, hollow sound, and Laura was thrown against the face. She stopped moving. In that moment, everything she was to the world disappeared. Olympic gold, titles, a legend of German sport. What remained was the slope, falling rock, and a distance that couldn't be crossed without risking a second life. The distress call would come later. Rescue efforts would begin hours after that. But even then, at nearly 19,000 feet, it was already becoming clear even a helicopter might not make it in time. This video is based on publicly available sources and verified reports. Some details are presented as careful reconstruction and are not stated as confirmed fact. To understand why turning back at nearly 19,000 feet was considered the right call, it is important to understand who Laura Dahlmeier was beyond headlines and medals. She was born on August 22, 1993, in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, a town at the edge of the Bavarian Alps. Mountains were not a backdrop in her life. They were part of daily routine. By the age of 6, she was already on skis. By 12, she was training with adults. According to coaches, she stood out not because of aggression, but because of an unusual ability to stay calm under pressure. In biathlon, that ability is everything. On the shooting range, emotions do not matter. Breathing, heart rate, and micro movements decide the outcome. Control or failure. Over time, Laura developed an exceptional skill for reading conditions, both internal and external. That precision became her greatest advantage. Her peak years came quickly. By her early 20s, she had become one of the most dominant athletes in the sport. She was known for discipline, accuracy, and restraint. Not for controversy, not for spectacle. Her performances were described as clean and controlled, even when the pressure was at its highest. Then, in 2019, she made a decision that shocked the sports world. At 25 years old, without injury and without decline in performance, Laura announced that she was stepping away from professional competition. In her public statement, she explained that she no longer felt a sense of purpose in continuing. She had achieved what she set out to do, and she wanted to move on. For many people, it sounded like walking away at the top. But for those who understood her mindset, it followed the same logic she applied throughout her career. If a goal no longer existed, forcing the path forward made no sense. After leaving biathlon, Laura did not disappear. She redirected her focus. She began training seriously in mountaineering, not as a hobby and not as a symbolic transition, but as a new discipline that demanded the same structure and responsibility. She completed professional courses in alpine safety, avalanche awareness, and rescue procedures. She trained in the Alps and gradually moved on to more technical and demanding routes. According to people familiar with her approach, she deliberately avoided commercial expeditions and crowded climbs. She did not believe that standing in line on a mountain face represented real alpinism. Between 2021 and 2024, her climbs became increasingly complex. Technical routes, exposed ridgelines, altitudes exceeding 23,000 feet. There were no announcements and no dramatic posts. Each climb was treated as a learning process rather than an achievement to display. In interviews that later resurfaced after her death, Laura spoke openly about her philosophy. She said that for her, mountains were not about reaching the top at any cost. They were about judgment, timing, and knowing when to stop. In early summer 2025, she arrived in Pakistan. The Karakoram range is not forgiving. Weather, isolation, and logistics matter as much as physical strength. According to open sources, she did not publicly outline her plans. There were no bold statements, only a short message about preparation. In early July, Laura and her climbing partner successfully completed a technical ascent of a peak rising above 19,500 feet. The climb was demanding but controlled. No incidents, no errors. It was exactly the kind of preparation experienced climbers look for before attempting a more serious objective. That second objective was Laila Peak. This is where the context becomes critical, because Laila Peak is not famous for its height. It is known for something else entirely. Nearly everyone who has climbed near it agrees on one point. It does not forgive mistakes, even when decisions are correct. And Laura approached it with the same principle that had defined her entire life. Know when to turn back before the mountain decides for you. But the Karakoram is not a stadium, and sometimes even the right decision does not change the outcome. Laila Peak rarely appears in lists of famous mountains. Its elevation, just over 20,000 feet, is modest by Karakoram standards. But among climbers, it has a very different reputation. The mountain is known for its shape, a nearly perfect pyramid of ice and rock. Visually striking, structurally unforgiving. There are no easy lines on Laila. One side is dominated by steep rock faces. The other is covered in hard ice that quickly becomes unstable when temperatures rise. Key sections of the route reach angles of 50 to 60 degrees. At that steepness, gravity does not forgive delay. Any rock released from above becomes a projectile. There is no warning, no time to react. The Karakoram is not the Alps. There are no permanent rescue teams on standby. No predictable helicopter access. Most peaks are separated from base camps by long glacier approaches in unstable terrain. Even under ideal conditions, a rescue can take many hours or longer. In the summer of 2025, conditions were far from ideal. According to weather data and reports from climbers in the region, temperatures were unusually high. Warm air weakens the bonds holding ice and rock together. Small movements turn into falling debris. Falling debris turns into large rockfall. On steep faces like Laila, this process accelerates quickly. Laura and her climbing partner noticed the signs. Rockfall was becoming more frequent. The surface conditions were changing. Ice that should have remained solid was beginning to soften. This is the moment where experience matters. Less than 200 vertical feet from the summit, they made the decision to turn back. From a mountaineering perspective, it was the correct call. The risk of continuing upward outweighed any benefit of reaching the top. The descent began carefully. In climbing, the way down is often more dangerous than the ascent. Fatigue sets in, focus must be maintained, and the route frequently passes beneath the same slopes that threatened the climbers earlier. They moved section by section. Rope management was controlled. Communication was clear. There was no panic. And then the mountain changed the equation. Based on the reconstruction of events, a single rock broke free from the wall above. Not a series, not a slide. One large piece, likely released by warming conditions higher on the face. It accelerated almost instantly and crossed the line of descent. Laura was struck and thrown against the wall. She stopped moving. Her partner was positioned lower on the slope. Climbing back up would have meant entering a zone of active rockfall. Every step upward increased the likelihood of a second casualty. In mountaineering, this is one of the hardest decisions a climber can face. Stay and risk 2 lives, or descend and try to save one. She chose to descend. After several hours, she reached a safer area and encountered another group of climbers. Coordinates were relayed to base camp. A rescue alert was issued. On paper, the process had begun, but Laila Peak exists in a region where standard procedures often fail. The area is under strict military control. Airspace access is limited. Helicopter operations require authorization, even in emergencies. And authorization does not override physics. Flying above 16,000 to 18,000 feet pushes helicopters near their operational limits. Thin air reduces lift. Wind becomes unpredictable. Hovering near a steep wall requires exceptional conditions and precision. As evening approached, the weather deteriorated. Wind speeds increased. Visibility dropped. Rockfall continued. Even if a helicopter had been cleared immediately, the margin for safe flight was disappearing. Nightfall at nearly 19,000 feet changes everything. Temperatures drop rapidly. Cold drains strength. Immobility becomes critical. Survival time narrows with every passing hour. The following day, when weather briefly improved, a helicopter was able to approach the area. From the air, a motionless figure was observed on the slope. According to the flight crew, there were no visible signs of movement. Even then, the decision was not simple. The slope remained unstable. Rockfall had not stopped. Any attempt to hover and deploy a rescuer risked the lives of the crew. The operation had reached its limit. At this point, it became clear that the situation was no longer about capability. It was about consequence, and the hardest decision was still ahead. When the distress signal reached the base camp, everything formally looked like a standard high-altitude emergency. There were coordinates. There was a climber in trouble. There was a helicopter for someone far from mountaineering. This usually means one thing: takeoff, approach, evacuation. But in the Karakoram, this logic almost never works. Laila Peak is located in an area under strict military control. This is a zone of heightened sensitivity, proximity to disputed territories, restrictions on airspace, and the need for authorization at the highest level. Even in emergency situations, a helicopter cannot simply take off at the request of rescuers. Permission is required, sometimes more than one. There is also the technical limitation. Flying above 16,000 to 18,000 feet is near the operational limit for most helicopters. Thin air drastically reduces lift. The aircraft becomes less stable. Any attempt to hover near a rock face turns into a serious risk for the crew. To evacuate a person, the pilot must hold the helicopter within several yards of the wall while a rescuer is lowered on a rope. In strong winds, this becomes nearly impossible. According to Pakistani services, weather conditions began to deteriorate sharply on the evening of July 28th. Wind intensified, visibility dropped to near zero. Rockfall continued. Even if permission had been granted instantly, the window for a safe flight was closing. Night at nearly 19,000 feet is a critical factor. Temperatures drop below freezing. The body loses heat many times faster. Any period of immobility drastically reduces the chances of survival. This is not speculation. This is well known to rescue teams. The following day, when cloud cover briefly lifted, one of the helicopters was able to approach and conduct a visual inspection. From the air, a motionless figure was observed on the slope. According to the crew report, there were no visible signs of movement. But even at that moment, the question was not whether it was possible, but whether it was acceptable. Rockfall had not stopped. The slope remained unstable. Any attempt to hover nearby meant risking not only the aircraft, but also the crew. The leaders of the operation faced the same choice that Marina Kraus had faced the day before. Attempt to rescue at any cost, or stop in order to avoid creating a second tragedy. Here, another rarely discussed element of this story becomes important. According to Laura Dahlmeier, manager, before the expedition she had left a clearly worded written will. It stated that in the event of a serious incident, no one should risk their life attempting to rescue her or recover her body. This decision was made in advance, in a clear state of mind, by a person who fully understood where she was going and what risk she was accepting. For rescue services, such a document carries weight. It does not cancel attempts to help, but it changes priorities. When the probability of success is minimal and the risk to others is extreme, the express will of the injured person cannot be ignored. On July 29th, the operation was officially suspended. This decision triggered many questions. Why did they not continue? Why did they not wait another day? Why did they not take the risk? In true crime formats, there is always a search for someone to blame. The mountain, the weather, bureaucracy, the partner, the rescuers. But in this story, there is no single action that can be labeled as a mistake. There is a chain of decisions, each of which was rational on its own. Laura turned back in time. Marina descended to save at least one life. Rescuers refused to proceed in order not to create another tragedy. And this is the hardest part of this story. It is not about a fatal mistake. It is about the limit of human control. A few hours after the official confirmation of her death, the news spread across Germany. For the country, she was not just an athlete, but a symbol of discipline, strength, and responsibility. The German president later said that she had been an example of living without fear and without illusion. But in the Karakoram, symbols do not remain. Only decisions remain, and their consequences. After the official confirmation of Laura Dahlmeier's death, the reaction in the media was almost unanimous. And this is an important detail. The wording did not focus on recklessness or irresponsible risk. Instead, the key theme was respect. Major German and international outlets emphasized not the tragedy itself, but the way she lived and made decisions. In official statements from sports federations, it was stated that Dahlmeier had always been known for a responsible approach and had never treated the mountains lightly. Her transition from elite sport to mountaineering was described not as an escape from a career, but as a conscious stage of life. Her preparation was emphasized repeatedly. Journalists pointed out that she had completed professional training, held safety and rescue certifications, and that her climbs were not tourist or commercial expeditions. This was stressed deliberately as a response to the inevitable public question. Did she know what she was getting into? The answer from the media was clear. Yes. Statements from members of the mountaineering community also highlighted that the decision to turn back on Laila Peak was consistent with accepted safety standards. This detail appeared frequently in analytical articles. The tragedy occurred not because of an attempt to reach the summit at any cost, but after the decision to abandon it. Her written will was also discussed publicly. The request not to risk other lives in an attempt to rescue her or recover her body was presented not as emotional detachment, but as a continuation of her character. A person who had worked with risk her entire life had taken responsibility not only for herself, but also for those who might be involved in a rescue. It is also important to note what was absent from the public reaction. There was no widespread search for blame. There was no pressure directed at her climbing partner. There were no accusations toward rescue services. Experts repeatedly emphasized that in Karakoram conditions, such decisions are tragic but understandable. In summary coverage, Laura was described not simply as a former athlete, but as a figure representing discipline, self-control, and respect for limits. Not as a symbol of victory, but as an example of an honest relationship with choice and consequence. This is why, in public perception, the story settled not as a scandal and not as a controversy, but as a quiet tragedy of a person who was considered a professional to the very end. In the materials published after her death, journalists and climbers almost always emphasized one detail. Laura Dahlmeier never chose tourist routes. She deliberately avoided places where climbing turns into a stream of people, where climbers stand in line on the summit to take a photo, and where risk is masked by organized comfort. According to those familiar with her approach, this was a matter of principle for her. Commercial mountaineering with fixed ropes, large numbers of guides, and crowds of people was something she considered a loss of meaning. In interviews later quoted by the media, Dahlmeier said that for her, mountains were not a stage and not a competition, but a space of responsibility, where a person is left alone with reality and with their own decisions. That is why her routes were never announced loudly. She did not assemble expeditions for headlines and did not publish detailed plans. Even her trip to Pakistan in the summer of 2025 passed almost unnoticed. A few lines on social media, one photograph without a location tag, and nothing more. No mention of summits and no hints of ambition. After the tragedy, this choice became especially clear. Laila Peak is not a mass mountain. There are no lines, no infrastructure, and no ready-made solutions. Every step there is calculation, not movement along a prepared path. And it was exactly such places that she chose again and again. This is where the paradox of her story lies. She left a sport where every movement is controlled and where safety is built down to the smallest detail, and consciously moved into a space where control is always limited. Not because she was seeking danger, but because she accepted it as part of an honest dialogue with the mountains. When the rescue operation was officially stopped, the statements contained the same idea. Everything that could be done without risking others was done. This did not sound like justification. It sounded like a statement of a boundary beyond which human capability ends. The decision not to recover the body caused confusion among part of the audience. But those who understood mountaineering understood something else. This was not refusal. It was a continuation of the same ethic. She had asked in advance not to turn her death into another dangerous operation. Not to add new victims. Not to break the lives of those who might try. Today, Laura Dahlmeier remains where she wanted to be in life. In the mountains she respected and never considered conquered. Without a monument, without a plaque, without a line of people coming to take a photo. Her story is not about recklessness and not about a fatal mistake. It is about choice, about how even the most prepared and disciplined people sometimes face situations where the right decision does not guarantee the outcome. And about how a person's dignity is shown not only in victories, but in how they accept risk and its consequences. In a world where success is often measured by a frame from the summit, this story remains different. Quiet, unshowy. And that is exactly why it feels worth sharing. Not as a legend of heroism, but as a reminder of a boundary that cannot be crossed by experience, titles, or willpower. Because sometimes the highest point is the moment when a person honestly knows why they are there. If this story felt important to you, please consider sharing it. Stories like this do not need noise or sensationalism. They matter because they are real, and because they show where human limits truly are. You can support Silent Trails by liking this video. Subscribe to the channel if you want more carefully researched stories about choice, risk, and consequence, told without myths and without exaggeration. And save this video if you believe it deserves to be passed on. Here, we do not chase spectacle. Here, we follow the trail quietly, all the way to the end.
Thank you for watching, guys. See you in next video. Bye bye.